The city stretched endlessly beneath them, a labyrinth of glowing lights and distant sirens, yet up here, on the quiet rooftop, it felt like the world had shrunk to just the two of them. Lila leaned against the low brick wall, her fingers tracing the rough edges, trying to steady the rapid thrum of her heart. She wasn't usually the type to sneak out after hours, but something about tonight felt electric, forbidden, and intoxicating. She glanced at him, Ethan standing just a few feet away, silhouetted against the city lights, his dark jacket slightly ruffled from the breeze. The way he looked at her made her pulse quicken, as if he could see every hidden thought, every flicker of desire she tried to conceal. His eyes, sharp and warm, held an intensity that both unnerved and thrilled her. "Are you sure we shouldn't be down there?" she asked, her voice a whisper almost lost in the wind. Ethan shook his head, a slow, deliberate movement that made the tension coil tighter in her chest. "Not tonight," he murmured, stepping closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "Tonight. I want it to be just us." Lila's breath hitched. There was a danger in those words, a daring edge that made her pulse race. The rooftop felt like a secret universe suspended above the city's chaos, a place where rules didn't exist and time could bend to their will. She shivered not from the cold but from the anticipation that surged between them, a tangible current that made the air crackle. Ethan reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered at her jawline, warm and insistent. "You have no idea how long I've wanted this," he confessed, his voice low and rough, vibrating against her skin like an unspoken promise. She swallowed, the tension coiling tighter. Every nerve in her body screamed in response to his proximity. She'd imagined moments like this, fantasies that hovered just beyond the limits of propriety, but reality, Ethan, real and alive, was far more consuming. "Ethan," she breathed, a whisper of his name that felt like a surrender. He leaned closer, their foreheads almost touching, and she could feel the heat radiating from him. The city below became irrelevant, a distant hum, as if the universe had contracted to the space between them. His hand moved to her waist, pulling her slightly closer, enough to make her heart skip, enough to make her feel every brush of his body. Their lips hovered, almost touching, a tantalizing space charged with anticipation. Lila's fingers found their way to his chest, feeling the firm weight beneath the jacket, every beat of his heart resonating with her own. She closed her eyes, savoring the tension, the hunger that had been building since the moment they'd met months ago. Ethan's lips finally brushed hers, a whisper of a kiss that ignited a fire she didn't know she could contain. It was gentle, teasing, exploratory, yet beneath it lay a hunger that promised more. She melted into it, letting the world slip away, leaving only the heat between them, the rooftop as their private realm of desire. When they finally broke apart, gasping softly, the night felt heavier, charged with a sensual electricity neither could deny. Ethan rested his forehead against hers, whispering, "This is just the beginning." Lila's heart raced as she nodded, unable to speak, knowing that whatever awaited them, it would be a night neither of them would ever forget. The city lights glimmered below, but up here, on the rooftop, everything belonged to them: the stolen touches, the whispered confessions, the longing that simmered just beneath the surface. And as the wind tangled around them, carrying their whispered promises into the night, Lila realized that some desires were too powerful to resist. The wind had picked up, tugging at their clothes and teasing her hair into wild strands that brushed against her face and shoulders. Lila felt herself shiver, not from the chill, but from the closeness of him, from the way Ethan's presence seemed to anchor her and ignite her at the same time. Every nerve in her body hummed with anticipation, her heart pounding like a drum against her ribs. He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking until it felt like the rooftop itself had narrowed just for them. His fingers found the small of her back, guiding her gently to the edge where the city lights stretched endlessly below. Lila's breath caught at the vertigo, at the thrill of danger, at the way his eyes darkened when he noticed her reaction. "You like this, don't you?" he murmured, his lips brushing her ear. His voice was a low vibration that sent shivers down her spine. Lila's response was a whisper, almost inaudible over the wind. I do." The simplicity of her words seemed to make him hunger even more. Ethan leaned in, his lips trailing along her jaw, a slow, deliberate path that made her knees weak. Every touch was electric, a promise of more, each caress igniting a fire that only seemed to grow with the night. Her hands roamed, tentative at first, discovering the broad planes of his shoulders and the warmth beneath his jacket. She could feel the tension in his muscles, the steady beat of his heart, the unspoken desire that matched her own. For a moment, neither spoke, and the silence was heavy, charged with an intimacy that needed no words. Ethan tilted her chin gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. The city's glow reflected in his dark eyes, but there was a raw, unrestrained hunger that seemed to strip away all barriers. "Tell me you want this," he whispered, almost a challenge, almost a plea. "I do," she admitted, her voice quivering, betraying the heat that coursed through her veins. "I want this." A slow, victorious smile curved his lips, and he captured her mouth in a kiss that was no longer tentative. It was demanding, yet tender, a push and pull that made her heart race and her thoughts blur. She clung to him instinctively, letting the intensity of the moment sweep over her, letting herself get lost in the sensation of lips, breath, and hands exploring, claiming, teasing. The wind whipped around them, tugging at their clothes, yet it only heightened the electricity of their closeness. Lila felt her body press against his, felt the heat of his hands as they traced the curve of her waist and slid slowly toward the small of her back. Each touch was deliberate, teasing, igniting a fire that threatened to consume every rational thought. "You drive me crazy," Ethan admitted between kisses, his forehead resting against hers for a brief moment of reprieve. The rasp in his voice sent tremors down her spine. "I've wanted this, wanted you since the first time I saw you." Her pulse quickened at the confession. She wanted him too, more than she had ever admitted, more than she had allowed herself to imagine. "I've wanted you too," she breathed, a tremor in her voice betraying the depth of her desire. Ethan's hands moved with careful insistence, exploring the familiar yet thrilling terrain of her body. His lips left hers only to trail along her neck, leaving a trail of warmth and longing that made her shiver uncontrollably. Lila arched into him, her fingers tangling in the material of his jacket, her body responding with a hunger that matched his. The rooftop felt like their own hidden world, a place where nothing mattered except the heat between them, the stolen moments of touch and whispered promises. Lila could feel the tension coiling tighter with every second, the anticipation of what was to come making her pulse race. "Just stay with me tonight," Ethan murmured, his lips brushing hers again, softer now, a promise of more than just fleeting passion. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered back, letting the wind and the night carry her words into the air, into the space that belonged only to them. As the city hummed far below, the rooftop became a sanctuary, a stage for whispered confessions and fevered touches. And as they clung to each other, lost in the moment, Lila knew that whatever else the night held, it would leave an imprint on them both, raw, intimate, and impossible to forget. The city's hum was distant now, a background melody to the symphony of sensations coursing between them. Lila's fingers trembled slightly as they traced the strong line of Ethan's jaw, memorizing every curve, every subtle movement. He responded instinctively, his hands mapping the contours of her body with an urgency that made her knees weak. The air around them seemed charged, electric, carrying a heat that no rooftop could contain. The space between them vanished as Ethan pressed closer, and Lila felt his heartbeat sync with her own, a rapid, insistent rhythm that made the world outside irrelevant. Every glance, every brush of skin, was a wordless conversation, a confession of desire too potent to be restrained. Ethan's lips moved from hers to her neck, trailing hot, teasing kisses that made her gasp and shiver. She tilted her head, giving him access, surrendering to the sensation. His hand slid along her sides, gripping gently but possessively, drawing her even closer. She could feel the tension building in him, the way he ached for more just as desperately as she did. "Lila," he murmured, his voice low, rough, vibrating through her like a private secret. She felt it resonate deep inside, a tremor that left her weak yet craving. Her voice faltered. Words weren't enough, gestures weren't enough. Her body spoke in shivers, in small arches toward him, in the warmth of her hands tracing his chest. She let herself melt into the sensation, letting the night consume her, letting him consume her. Ethan's lips captured hers again, deeper now, more demanding, exploring, claiming. His hands wandered to the curve of her back, to the small of her waist, pulling her flush against him. Every inch of contact ignited a fire, a hunger neither could ignore. She pressed back instinctively, letting herself feel, letting herself succumb to the magnetic pull. The wind tugged at her hair, caressing her skin as if nature itself conspired to heighten the sensation. Lila's hands tangled in Ethan's hair, tugging him closer, eliciting a low groan that made her shiver all over. Their kiss was a battle of control and surrender, a dance of longing that left them both breathless. He pulled back just slightly, enough to look into her eyes, and the heat in his gaze made her knees feel unsteady. "I can't stop thinking about this," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly, betraying the depth of his need. "About you." Her breath hitched, and she let her forehead rest against his chest, listening to the rapid thrum of his heartbeat. "I've wanted this, wanted you, since the first time I saw you," she confessed softly, each word like a spark fanning the flame between them. Ethan's hands tightened around her waist, pulling her impossibly close, and she felt the undeniable press of his desire, the raw intensity of what they were becoming. The rooftop, the night, the city below all faded into insignificance compared to the fire burning between them. He kissed her again, slower now, savoring, teasing, letting the moment stretch until it became a living, breathing thing. Lila responded in kind, letting herself explore, letting herself feel every shiver, every heartbeat, every tremor that passed between them. The intensity was maddening, intoxicating, a blend of fear and exhilaration that left her trembling. Ethan's lips left hers to whisper along her jaw, his breath hot against her skin. "I need you," he admitted, the words raw, unfiltered, impossible to ignore. "I need you too," she whispered back, her hands roaming, her body arching into him, needing more than just touch, needing the promise of complete surrender. The city below remained a blur of lights, but up here, on the rooftop, time had slowed. Every stolen touch, every whispered word, every heated glance became magnified, a world unto itself. The intimacy they shared was not just physical, it was a collision of hearts, of longing, of something deeper that neither had fully named but both recognized. Lila pressed herself closer, her lips brushing his again in a kiss that was both question and answer. Ethan's hands moved with an intensity that left her breathless, teasing, exploring, igniting every nerve. She responded in kind, letting the night, the rooftop, and the desire between them guide her. And as the wind tangled around them, carrying their whispered promises into the dark, Lila realized this was more than a fleeting passion, it was a connection that refused to be denied, a fire that had been waiting for the perfect moment to blaze into life. The night air wrapped around them like a lover's embrace, cool against the flush of their skin yet failing to temper the heat that radiated between them. Lila's hair whipped across her face, but she barely noticed, lost in the magnetic pull of Ethan's gaze. Every movement, every breath, every subtle brush of fingers seemed magnified, drawing them closer until the world beyond the rooftop didn't exist. Ethan's hands traced the line of her spine, warm and insistent, sending shivers down her back that made her knees weak. He leaned in, brushing his lips against the shell of her ear, his breath hot and intoxicating. "You feel like fire tonight," he whispered, his voice low and rough, vibrating through her like a private secret. Lila shivered at the words, feeling the heat of his hands on her waist, the steady pull of his body against hers. "You make it impossible to think," she murmured, her voice trembling with desire. "Impossible to resist." A slow smile curved his lips, dark and knowing. "Good," he said, pressing a gentle kiss against her temple. "Because I don't plan on stopping." Her pulse quickened as he leaned back slightly, just enough to look into her eyes, and she saw the hunger there, raw and unfiltered. It mirrored her own, a reflection of every suppressed desire she had carried for months, now unleashed in the quiet of the night. Ethan's hands moved with deliberate precision, sliding along her sides, tracing the curve of her waist before resting lightly on the small of her back. The contact was both grounding and electrifying, a paradox that left her trembling. Lila's fingers found their way to his chest, feeling the steady, insistent beat of his heart, and she pressed closer, as if the proximity could somehow bind them together. "I can't get enough of you," he admitted, his lips brushing along her jawline, leaving a trail of warmth that made her shiver. "Every look, every touch, every whispered word. I've wanted it all." Lila let out a soft gasp, her body responding instinctively. She leaned into him, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer, needing more of the sensation, more of the connection. Every inch of his body pressed against hers was a promise, a silent confession that mirrored the fire in her own veins. Their kisses deepened, more demanding now, a push and pull that left them both breathless. The rooftop seemed to shrink around them, enclosing them in a private universe where only desire existed. Lila felt the tension coil tighter with every touch, every sigh, every whispered word. It was intoxicating, overwhelming, a blend of anticipation and release that made her pulse race. Ethan's hands moved lower, resting against her hips, pulling her flush against him with careful insistence. She pressed back instinctively, letting the sensations wash over her, letting herself succumb to the magnetic draw that bound them together. The night, the wind, the city below it all faded into irrelevance. There was only this, only them, only the fire that threatened to consume every rational thought. "Lila," Ethan's voice was a low rumble, vibrating through her chest. "Do you feel it too? This, everything between us?" "I do," she whispered, her lips brushing his again in a kiss that was tender yet fierce, a confession of her own desire. "More than I ever thought I could." His hands tightened slightly, anchoring her to him, as if letting her slip even an inch would be unbearable. Every brush of skin against skin, every shared breath, was a spark, igniting a fire that refused to be tamed. Lila's body trembled with anticipation, craving the next moment, the next touch, the next whisper of intimacy that would leave them both undone. The city lights below blurred into streaks of color, irrelevant compared to the vivid intensity of their connection. Ethan's lips traced her collarbone, a teasing exploration that left her gasping, and she clung to him, surrendering fully to the sensation. Their world had contracted to the rooftop, to the stolen moments of heat and longing, to the whispered promises that danced between them like flames. And as the wind tangled around them, carrying their murmured confessions into the night, Lila realized that some desires could not be restrained, not by fear, not by hesitation, not by the world below. They belonged to the night, to the rooftop, to the fire that consumed them both, and she knew that this was only the beginning. The wind had grown sharper, whipping around them with a wild insistence, but neither Lila nor Ethan noticed. Their world had narrowed to the heat between them, the shared breaths, the trembling touches that spoke louder than words ever could. Lila's fingers clutched at his jacket, anchoring herself to him as if letting go would send her tumbling into the emptiness below, or perhaps into a fear she no longer cared to feel. Ethan's lips trailed along her jaw, each kiss deliberate, teasing, leaving a path of warmth in its wake. His hands roamed with a gentle yet commanding authority, exploring the familiar terrain of her curves while leaving just enough mystery to keep her senses alight. The rooftop felt like their private universe, a place where time bent, boundaries dissolved, and every whispered confession became an unspoken promise. "You're driving me insane," Ethan murmured, his voice rough with desire. I can't stop thinking about every inch of you." Lila shivered, a gasp escaping her lips. "Then don't stop," she whispered, her words almost lost to the wind, yet laden with invitation, surrender, and need. Ethan's hands tightened slightly at her waist, pressing her against him. She could feel the press of his desire, the way his body mirrored her own hunger. Every brush of his fingertips, every lingering touch, sent sparks that seemed to ignite the very air around them. Her head tilted back, giving him more access, more control, yet feeling completely safe in his presence, completely consumed by the intensity of the moment. He kissed her again, slow, deep, exploring, claiming, and she responded in kind, letting herself lose all semblance of restraint. The city lights below blurred into a haze of color as the night focused entirely on them, the stolen touches, the rapid breaths, the whispered confessions that left them both trembling. Ethan's hands moved with careful insistence, sliding along her back, teasing over her curves, and Lila arched into him instinctively. Every motion, every touch, every subtle pressure of skin against skin was a conversation, a question, an answer, and the tension built higher, tighter, unbearable in its intensity. "I've wanted this, wanted you, so much," he whispered against her lips, his teeth grazing her lower lip ever so slightly, eliciting a gasp that echoed across the rooftop. Lila's fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, needing more of this electric connection that seemed impossible to quench. Her heart raced, and her breath came in sharp, trembling gasps as Ethan's lips trailed along her neck, teasing, tasting, leaving her skin tingling and burning. She pressed back instinctively, her body arching into him, every nerve ignited, every pulse screaming in response. The desire between them was raw, unfiltered, a magnetic pull that neither could resist. "You have no idea how irresistible you are," Ethan murmured, his hands firm at her waist, holding her as if she were the only thing that mattered in the world. "I think I do," she whispered, her lips brushing his in a fleeting kiss, a promise, a surrender. "Because I feel the same, more than I can explain." The night around them seemed to shrink, drawing them into its intimate cocoon. Every whispered word, every stolen glance, every sigh of breathless longing bound them tighter, as if the rooftop itself conspired to keep them suspended in this suspended world of fire and heat. Lila's body trembled against him, consumed by the intensity, and Ethan's hands followed each curve, each movement, exploring, teasing, leaving them both gasping and craving. Their connection was no longer just desire, it was a hunger, a need, a tension that threatened to overflow at any moment. Lila rested her forehead against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart, syncing it with her own. The fire between them was undeniable, unstoppable, and exhilarating. Ethan's lips brushed hers again in a slow, deliberate kiss, his hands lingering, exploring, igniting a heat that made the rooftop feel like it was theirs alone. "Stay with me," he whispered, a promise that carried in its simplicity the weight of every unspoken feeling, every suppressed desire, every longing they had denied themselves until now. "I'm not going anywhere," Lila whispered back, surrendering fully to the moment, to the night, to the fire that blazed between them. And in that suspended world, above the city lights, with the wind tangling around them, she knew that some nights were meant to burn, to consume, and to leave a mark that neither time nor distance could ever erase. The city sprawled endlessly beneath them, a glittering sea of lights and shadows, but up here on the rooftop, Lila and Ethan existed in a world entirely their own. The air was crisp, carrying the distant hum of traffic, but neither of them noticed. All that existed was the heat between them, the pull that had been building for weeks, months perhaps, and now threatened to overwhelm them completely. Ethan's hands were everywhere at once, yet deliberate, sliding over her waist, pressing into her back, tracing the curve of her shoulders with a touch that was both demanding and gentle. Lila felt her body responding instinctively, a shiver running from her neck down to her toes. The heat of him against her, the closeness, the subtle brush of skin, everything combined to make her pulse race in a maddening rhythm. "I can't stop thinking about you," Ethan murmured, his lips barely brushing hers. Not a moment goes by, his voice trailed off into a low rumble that made her shiver again. Lila pressed her hands against his chest, feeling the steady, insistent beat of his heart, matching it to her own frantic rhythm. "Then don't," she whispered, her voice trembling with desire. "Don't stop, not now." He didn't. Ethan leaned in, capturing her lips in a deep, consuming kiss that seemed to pull the very air from her lungs. It was more than passion, it was need, hunger, and surrender all in one. Her hands tangled in his hair, tugging him closer as if she could anchor herself to him, afraid she might float away into the vertigo of sensation otherwise. The wind whipped around them, tugging at their hair and clothes, but it only heightened the tension, teasing, amplifying every nerve ending. Lila felt her body respond to every brush of his fingers, every press of his body against hers. The night had wrapped them in its embrace, giving them a private universe where desire reigned supreme. Ethan's lips trailed from hers to her neck, his mouth leaving a path of fire across her skin. Lila gasped, tilting her head, exposing herself to him fully, letting the sensations wash over her in waves. His hands moved lower, pressing her closer, as if the space between them could not contain the intensity of what they felt. "I've wanted this, you, more than I can say," he admitted, his breath hot against her ear. "Every look, every smile, every little thing you do, it's burned into me." Her knees weakened at the confession, and she pressed herself flush against him. "I feel the same," she whispered. "I've felt it from the beginning, even when I tried to hide it." A slow smile tugged at the corner of his lips before he captured hers again, deeper, urgent, claiming. Their kiss was a conversation, an exploration, a declaration of every secret desire that had been simmering beneath the surface. Lila's body arched instinctively into him, responding to the magnetic pull, the raw need in his touch. Every brush of skin, every shared breath, every lingering caress became a spark, igniting a fire that made the rooftop feel like a private inferno. The city lights blurred below, the distant sirens faded into insignificance, and time itself seemed to bend around the heat of their connection. Ethan's hands pressed firmly at her hips, anchoring her to him, guiding, teasing, claiming. Lila's fingers roamed his back, memorizing the tension in his muscles, the warmth beneath his jacket, the strength that pressed her into him. Her breaths came faster, shorter, and the night felt like a suspended moment in which nothing else mattered but them. "I need you," he whispered, low and rough, a tremor betraying the depth of his longing. "I'm yours," she breathed back, surrendering completely. "All of me, for tonight." They kissed again, slow, deliberate, savoring, letting the tension stretch to its breaking point. And as the wind swirled around them, carrying their whispered promises across the rooftop, Lila realized they had reached the edge, both fragile and unbreakable, consumed and consuming, caught in a fire that would not be denied. Up here, above the city, nothing else existed. Not the world below, not time, not consequence. Only the heat between them, the rush of their hearts, and the undeniable truth that some desires could only be fully realized when surrendered to completely. The city below sparkled like a million tiny stars, indifferent to the storm of heat and longing that consumed Lila and Ethan on the rooftop. The wind had softened now, carrying their breaths into the night as though even the elements wished to witness what they had become, two bodies, two hearts, two souls entwined in an intimacy that went beyond touch. Ethan held her close, his forehead resting against hers. Neither of them spoke at first, words were unnecessary. The rhythm of their breaths, the pulse of their hearts, the brush of skin against skin, these were the language they shared, a language far richer than anything spoken aloud. Lila's hands traced the line of his jaw, memorizing the familiar yet ever-thrilling contours, and Ethan's fingers tangled in her hair, pulling her impossibly closer. "You're incredible," he whispered, his voice rough with desire and awe. "I've never felt like this, with anyone. Not like this." Lila's lips curved into a soft smile, warmth flooding her chest. "Neither have I," she admitted, her voice trembling in the best way, raw, vulnerable, and utterly honest. "It's more than I imagined." Ethan captured her lips in a kiss that was slow, deliberate, and tender, a gentle contrast to the fire that had consumed them moments before. It was as if in this quiet pause, they were both realizing the depth of what had sparked between them, the connection that transcended the physical, that rooted itself deep in the heart. He pulled back slightly, his gaze locking onto hers, and Lila felt a shiver run down her spine at the intensity of his stare. "I don't want this night to end," he murmured, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "I don't want this us to end." Lila's heart thudded, and she pressed herself against him, feeling the reassuring warmth of his body. "Then it won't," she whispered back. "This, what we have, it's ours. Here. Now. Forever starts with this moment." The wind swirled around them again, playful and teasing, yet somehow protective, as though the night itself conspired to shield their sanctuary. Ethan's lips traced a path along her neck, then back to hers, slow and lingering, each kiss a promise, a vow, a whisper of eternity. Lila's hands roamed over his shoulders, down his back, memorizing the contours that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. "You're mine," he murmured against her lips, low and unshakable, a statement and a pledge all at once. "And you're mine," she breathed back, the words heavy with the weight of surrender and certainty. Their bodies pressed together, fitting perfectly, as if they had been molded for this very moment, this very night. They kissed again, deeper now, a culmination of every tension, every longing, every spark that had built since they first touched. The heat between them was no longer a question, it was a declaration, a celebration of desire finally realized, of passion finally embraced. Lila trembled in his arms, feeling every brush, every whisper, every pulse that radiated from him, and she knew that nothing in the world could ever feel as consuming. Ethan rested his forehead against hers once more, letting their breaths mingle in the cooling night air. "I never want to forget this," he whispered. "Never want to forget you." Lila smiled softly, a tear of joy and relief glistening at the corner of her eye. "You won't," she promised. "Because neither of us will ever forget tonight, or each other." For a long moment, they simply held each other, letting the city lights below, the stars above, and the wind around them be witnesses to their connection. Every whisper, every caress, every kiss had led them here, to a rooftop suspended between fantasy and reality, desire and intimacy, longing and fulfillment. Finally, Ethan kissed her once more, gentle, lingering, sealing the night with a tender fire. Lila melted against him, her body and heart completely surrendered, completely alive, completely his. The city hummed far below, but up here, on the rooftop, everything belonged to them, their stolen touches, whispered confessions, and the undeniable truth that some moments, some nights, some people, were unforgettable. And as the wind tangled around them, carrying their whispered promises into the vast, open night, Lila realized with a fluttering certainty that their story had only just begun. The rooftop was no longer just a place, it was a witness, a sanctuary, a beginning. And in each other's arms, they had found a fire that would burn far beyond the city lights, far beyond this night, far beyond anything they had ever imagined.